Way back in the early 2000s, my life looked picture perfect from the outside. A modest house, 2 beautiful kids, 4 and 6 at the time, and a wife who worked part-time while I worked full-time to keep the family afloat. But that picture started to crack, and once I saw behind it, I could never unsee it again. It started with my kids. You know how kids talk. They don't have a filter. They just blurt things out. One night at dinner, my youngest mentioned going to Grandma and Grandpa's house again. That didn't sound odd at first. Her parents lived about 90 minutes away, so visits weren't unheard of. But then the older one chimed in, saying they'd been there a lot lately, like every other day. That didn't sit right with me. Why was my wife driving our kids 3 hours, round trips several times a week, when she wasn't even working those days? So I asked her, straight up. Nothing aggressive, just curious. She lied. Said they hadn't been going there that often. That maybe the kids were just remembering the last visit. But she wasn't a good liar. Her eyes darted. Her answers were too quick. My gut twisted, and I knew something was off. So I did what any suspicious but careful person would do. I started tracking the mileage on her car. Quietly. Just a notebook, a pen, and the odometer. Within a week, I realized she was driving nearly 400 extra miles every week. I felt sick. My heart would pound every time I logged a new number. My hands would tremble. I couldn't sleep without seeing images in my mind. Her with someone else. And worst of all, I still had to look her in the eye and pretend I didn't know. Until one day, the universe handed me a gift. She'd left a sticky note on the desk. Her AOL password. Just sitting there like an open door. My hands hesitated. I stared at it for a long moment, then I cracked. I logged in. I shouldn't have been shocked, but I was. There were emails between her and her college best friend. And in them, she talked casually, almost proudly, about sleeping with one of her ex-boyfriends from high school. The same guy she used to gush over when we were dating. She bragged about how they'd hook up after dropping the kids off. Worse, she laughed at his wife, mocking how she'd let herself go after having kids. I printed those emails. Every single one. But I wasn't done. I needed the whole picture. So I called an old friend, a cop, and he connected me with Ron, a former detective turned private investigator. Ron was professional, sharp, and sympathetic. I paid him a retainer, handed him the emails, and gave him everything I knew. Within days, Ron painted a clear, disturbing picture. She'd drive the kids to her parents' house, just like I suspected. Then she'd meet up with Bob, her high school ex. They'd grab lunch, then go to this rundown motel that charged by the hour. She'd spend a few hours there, then pick up the kids and come home like nothing happened. I held Ron's report in my hands like it was fire. Photos, dates, times. My knees almost buckled when I saw her smiling in one of the photos, like she didn't have a care in the world. But here's where the revenge began. See, I wasn't just some broken husband looking for drama. I was a man who had lived through a war zone of a childhood because of my parents' infidelity. I knew what that kind of betrayal did to kids. And I wasn't going to let it define another generation. So I hired a divorce lawyer. Quietly. I didn't say a word to her. I just kept gathering everything. Then I asked Ron to dig deeper into Bob's life. And wow, did he deliver. Bob was married with 3 kids. He worked as a vice president of sales at his father-in-law's company. That's right. His wife's dad owned the company that paid Bob's salary. And their house? Owned by her parents too. Oh, this was going to be nuclear. I asked Ron to print 2 more copies of his report. One for my lawyer and one for Bob's wife. On the day my wife was served divorce papers at her work, in front of her co-workers, I had Ron pay a visit to Bob's wife. He handed her the entire report. Every photo, every email, every motel receipt. What she did with it. That was her decision. But she didn't just read it and cry. She went to war.